Good evening and welcome to Seoul, to the screening of Blind Ambition. My name is Sherif El-Azma'nın. I'm here to converse with Hassan. I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm also from Cairo, and I make experimental films and video. Hassan and myself had a long history as friends and a long history with discussion about the image in general. We've had a few published conversations before. I actually chose to speak about this work because it attracted me. I mean, this specific work attracted me for many reasons. I mean, again, the word attraction, or a process that lures one into kind of game. I see this work as a kind of conversation game, in a sense, that arouses one's desire for a possible resolution. So it kind of attracted me in the sense that there is a kind of suspense. Is something going to happen? Are these conversations going to conclude themselves? Is there going to be a climax? Is there going to be an outburst? This is formulated through working with how people talk. I mean, I see initially the work is about how people talk and these kind of knots that people suspend themselves in conversation. And that was the major attraction for me to come and speak to Hassan about this. I mean, again, I see these conversations as a kind of algorithm in interaction, where they're actually locked and suspended in a kind of tension. I mean, in your own words, you said that you had worked on finding a way with the actors or the performers. I mean, to quote you, you said that they connect to certain drives, human drives, where ambition comes from. By allowing this pursuit of drives, they often suspend themselves and do not resolve themselves. Can you kind of elaborate?
Yes, I think that the work with the actor, actually this piece was incredibly difficult. It was really a lot of work and it was very challenging for me. And a large part of it, other than before shooting or anything, is the work with the actors. And I knew from the very beginning that, I mean, anyway, I always had a specific way of working with actors, but for this piece specifically, I knew what I wanted from them. And from the very beginning, there are 27 actors I worked with here. And what I wanted from each and every single one of them is that there would be a sense in which they're like every single person in this film is trying to find a place where they can be, you know. And there's, I mean, the title is Blind Ambition, and maybe at points it becomes kind of focused and you can clearly see where that's happening, but actually the ambition that I'm trying to touch is underneath that, is the basic drive of definition, identification, and positioning. So when you say conversation, conversation is of course the the bread and butter of that. Conversation is where all these things are negotiated. Conversation is where the limits are drawn, where the game is played, as you said. I mean, that's absolutely true, I think, what you said about games, where the games are played. And so, to just be a bit concrete, in the actual work with the actors, I worked with everyone on conversations. You know, we kind of, I'm not going to go into detail with my actual method with actors, but I can say that in this work, it was a bit like, in a sense, almost like psychic sculpture, because I'd create a situation in which all the people who I'm working with can project certain their own desires in a way, and then I would shape them while they're in conversation. So for example, the scene with the 6 young men who are talking about this guy who borrowed money and is not giving money. For example, that scene, we would go and maybe have this conversation for 2-3 hours non-stop. All of them would be having this conversation, and I would be interrupting, changing things, whispering in people's ears, telling them certain things about their relationship with this person or that person, or you know, or in the scene with the 2 girls in the street who are shopping. After we established a basic kind of language, we went down into the street and just, you know, just had, I mean, and they went on much longer than this, you know, we just went. So, I mean, it's kind of, there's nothing too special about it in the end, because it's kind of standard improvisation work. Maybe I developed it in my own personal way, but it's not there to just create a sense of realism. It's not there for that. It's there so that this kind of sense of each one struggling for a position to be in becomes sharpened, and for the content to be produced through that, actually. So there's a lot of content produced through that.
That it's interesting what you just said, that it's not just a mechanic to make this simulated realism. I mean, such as in cinema or soap opera or living theater. But the work itself, for me at least, is not an illustration or a descriptive demonstration of such human behavior, or a human condition, but the work itself becomes a condition, in a sense. I mean, through this mutual power play and exercised control of one person onto the other and vice versa. I mean, how do you grasp that condition? I mean, how do you, as an audience and as an artist?
Yeah, I mean, today is this is the first time I see it screened, and I wanted to screen it here in Salt because I wanted to see it screened. I showed it before as a loop on a plasma screen, and it's quite different. The point about, I say that because it has to do with this idea of condition that you speak about. I think condition, this word, we spoke about this word, you know, over the past 10 years at different times, and I think we're both interested in this idea that the work doesn't necessarily describe something, but produces its own, it has its own condition, in a way. It has its own condition that is very specific and that changes from piece to piece. In Blind Ambition, I think there are maybe three very important elements in that. One is the editing style. So, I mean, it was really, the editing came from the way the film was constructed. So the way the film was constructed was out of these works with the actors, after we kind of produced a very specific, you know, arc and a situation and, in a way, a scene. But we didn't have really written dialogue, but we had phrases, terms, certain relationships between people. It was all kind of scripted in this way. And when we're ready to shoot that scene, we go down and the actors, I do not intervene with the actors, you know. Basically, I let them be and then, you know, kind of enter their situation and explore it. So what the camera is doing is that it's exploring a situation that acts as if it pre-exists. It's as if it's a pre-existing reality rather than a reality that I'm constructing. And I have full confidence in the actors I work with, so that I don't feel the need to tell them anything, actually, when we're actually shooting, because all the work has already been done, you know. I feel I can let them go for weeks and days and it will work, you know, somehow. And so that frees me in that moment to become an explorer rather than someone who's laying down a mise en scène, you know? And at the same time, what that means is that as they go on and on and on, I'm shooting this consciously knowing that I will edit it later on. So this is in the back of my mind. And I know that when I edit it, I also knew that I want to edit it in this style that you see, which is a continuity in motion. So the cuts are not discontinuous in terms of time. We are experiencing real time, but through, kind of a lot of editing. So we're constantly jumping from place to place in space, rather than jumping in time. And that's the same approach that's in a piece like Muslim Goes R.I.P., although stylistically it's very, very different. And the reason why I did this is because I think this has to do with the condition that you're speaking about. I think the reason I did this is that it does two things. One, it creates a sense of detail, so that every action that is happening, every word, every gesture, the way the people are also dressed, etc. I mean, all the details in the background, etc., become kind of highlighted, because there is like a certain insistence and a sense of time that is, I don't know, sticky almost. Like time slows down, even if even if the camera is fast. Time itself kind of slows down. That has to do with this kind of condition, and that gives us detail, and that's very, very important. And I think partially it's not a problem for me, but partially some of the detail is of course lost in language, because it's a very detailed piece in terms of even accents and word usage, etc. But anyway, we get a sense of detail, I think, that is constructed through this style of editing, and we get a sense of suspension, which is this lack of resolution, this continuously revolving around a central point that never becomes completely finished. And that is, I mean, I think that's how conversations happen, actually. I think resolution is related, is a technique. I mean, it's a literary technique or a filmic technique, and I have nothing against it. Can be used for its own purposes, but in this case, I was interested in this kind of detailed translation of conversation into a form, and I felt that that was fitting.
I mean, there's another thing about, again, the word condition. For me, that exists through the fact that both the audience and the conversation performer, which is the actor or the characters or whatever we can call them, is there, I mean, as an audience, I mean, I have to ask the audience, does reading a work like this depend on a certain cachet or an archive of memory from media, such as, again, soap operas, films, talk shows? I mean, is this sort of rigid regime kind of not referenced per se, but is it reused? I mean, do we watch Blind Ambition and remember soap opera? Do we remember how people talk? Do we remember, and do the actors use that cachet? Do they have access to that cachet?
Yes, I mean, it's an interesting question, because if you remember my film from '97, for example, which is a totally different film, but it had something to do with this, I think, this kind of memory of soap operas anyway.
Specifically how people speak.
How people speak. So in this work, it was interesting for me because, yes, they're actors. Part of what I did was break them out a little bit out of their, they're mostly actually professional actors, and I kind of, not all of them, but most of them, I kind of broke them a little bit because I didn't want that language actually here. But that language is part of daily conversation. So for example, and that was interesting in the work. For example, I have in my notes, when I was doing auditions, Magdi, an annoying kid who's like, I want my money, that guy. In the auditions, he did a little bit of comedy that has to do with, Egyptian comedy about being fat and blah, blah, blah. And I told him, yeah, I'm not really interested in, that kind of comedy. But I have a note in my notebook about, okay, he did this piece of comedy. Egyptian kids who are fat do that piece of comedy in their life anyway. It's in the media, and it's part of what you practice, you know. So I was thinking in my note, I was like, how am I going to use that? And it's there in a like almost when he walks, when he's holding like the Coke Zero and he's holding it and he's walking and he's going like this, you know. This has something to do with it. It's very subtle, and you know, it's a reference I do not expect from, you know, except very low. It's a very local reference, but it's very important. Even if it's not caught as a reference, it's very important because it makes the whole performance charged in a certain way. It has, for me at least, veracity, which allows for this non-resolution to continue, you know.
There's another sort of, in the great lexicon of conversations with Hassan Khan, there's two words, I mean, that come to mind when you are dealing with dialogue and people. One of them being status, whatever that status may be, possibly has something to do with ambition, and another word is humiliation. Can you sort of see where specifically the word humiliation, where does it lie?
Okay, so again, in blind ambition, a lot of these are almost notes because they're, for example, the two shopping girls. You know, I was walking and I just again caught with the edge of my eye or the side, you know, just caught of a moment where there was a girl telling someone, "Oh, come," and she's like, "No, come," and they're looking at the shop. Just that situation, not the whole conversation. And she told her, "Well, if you come, I'll buy you a Coke," you know. And it was a little bit bitchy, but it was also, you know, that was a note, you know. For example, that this whole scene came out of that note. Or, for example, the guy on the phone. I mean, that's like constantly kind of there's someone shouting on the phone in the back. I made you, or no, not this guy, the other guy in the mall, and who's like saying, "You better work." He's giving the guy advice. He's giving someone, you know, who's younger than him, or whatever. He's telling him, "You should do this and you should do that, and you're an idiot because you didn't do that," etc. This is a note, you know. I might be reading the newspaper somewhere and I catch one sentence from it, and it becomes this character. So actually, this is not how I always work, but this piece was mostly done. Or the advertising executives, you know, I've seen them in many cafes having this conversation, for again, a variation on this conversation. So for this piece, there is that element, actually. And that's where humiliation comes from, because, you know, I can speak about a social, I mean, this is a social order whose basic drive, or one of its basic motors is the act of humiliation. That just happens to be the context, and that's where the material of this piece is from, so it's very, very much there, you know. Maybe what's important is to say, how do I treat this humiliation, you know? I don't know successfully or not, but for me, at least personally, I know what I do not want to do, you know. I do not, you know, if it's there, I do not want to sentimentalize it. I don't want to make it distant. I want to meet it head on, you know, which can be difficult and uncomfortable in some ways. But I want to meet it head on, because I think it's actually important to have that position.
There's a lot of ideas that parallel, other works, in the exhibition. Like the fact, again, to quote you again, you probably mentioned that now a little bit, the details are important in terms of dress, /accent, /gesture. And for you, it's not about this photographic accuracy, but rather a way of touching history.
Yes.
The detail carries a detailed history of the place and the person. It is kind of like, you mentioned the jacket the guy is wearing in the piece upstairs, the name of the piece? Jewel. And that very jacket, actually for me as well, coming from Cairo means something.
Yes.
These objects almost, in a sense, become like the keys, like the mobile phone. these inanimate objects, or these objects that are used or owned by these people, are kind of objects of status somehow, or
yeah, I mean, depending, I mean, status, or I mean, the objects are used in different ways, but I mean, for example, the first scene with the advertising executives, when I say touching a history, I think here it's for me very clear. For example, the boss, who is identified by having like a gold bracelet somehow,
right,
and he's the boss of an advertising executive. His accent, again, this is something that is not translatable, so it's how it is. His accent betrays that his class origin is slightly different to the people who are working for him. And at the same time, the people who are working for him, they all have variations in the way they speak and dress that kind of imply, you know, very specific social positions, which imply histories. Each one of these social positions, the guy who is wearing, you know, like proper kind of business attire with a tie and shirt and stuff, and his attitude towards his work comes from a history, a very specific social history in Egypt in the 80s and 90s, and this person is related to that. While the girl who speaks about loving yourself in Buddhism, you know, she went to a different university than this guy for sure. Right. We know that. Yeah. You know, and there is an anxiety, for example, in the boss who has more money than all of them, yet comes from a different social background that is kind of betrayed in little moments. To me, and together, the sum total of all of that, you know, for example, in that scene, tells, you know, is a way of speaking about the history of that place and its class structure and how they've been formed, but not, I mean, obviously not as statistics, but rather as actual, you know, almost an emotional landscape of it's almost like an emotional landscape of class in a way, I think. Maybe the whole film has that sense.
I want to like come back to, I mean, again, these what I call kind of conversational algorithms, which are patterns of conversation. Like, for example, when you have a question that's answered by a question, and then so that's A, and then you have the B, which is a statement, and then you have A, B, and then, you know, these things have formulas, kind of. In the dog speaks on the first, the dead dog speaks on the first floor. There is that clear algorithm in its rawest form.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is obviously not. I mean, there's so much more detail here. There's so much more character history here. There's so much more situation here. Can you sort of tell me how do you sort of catch these algorithms? I mean, is it through observation? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. How do you catch these algorithms? I agree. I mean, for example, The Dead Dog Speaks has a different intention. It's about, in a way, about bringing language to a ground zero point. But that ground zero is operative also when you fill in that language and you fill it in with detail and personal relations, etc. That ground zero is still operative. You know, the basic constructs of positioning, response, statement, proposition, question, without being, I would say, without being absolutely, you know, formulaic about it, but that basic kind of structure is there. And my argument is not that this structure controls people. That's not my argument. I don't think, if I have an argument, my argument is definitely that there is nothing really in control in the end. You know, it's definitely a network of things, and together they produce a condition. You know, a condition. In this case, it's a social condition. This film is concerned with that social condition. And The Dead Dog Speaks, it's more abstract. It's not concerned with specifically, so it's concerned with a more, you know, more with the way language operates itself. Sure. But you can draw a direct line, I think, from this to that. Absolutely, I agree.
I mean, in the way, I mean, again, answering questions with questions, and then going back into a loop again where things are not resolved.
Yeah.
There's another thing, which is the sound. I mean the act of dubbing, which again I can parallel with Doom Talk, which is the installation upstairs with the speakers and the shabby music. For me, when I spoke to you about this before, with this piece specifically, to quote you, you said, to reproduce or reproducing what is said one more time, I mean in the dubbing process, and the overdubbing process, introduces another element to the situation, an element where reality is put at arm's length.
Yeah. Okay, shall I call?
Yeah, go on.
Well, the way this was done was, it was shot, and all the audio was recorded on the phone, so I didn't use any microphones or anything like that, which was a bit, of course, difficult. But I decided, my assistant was like, you should try to back up. And I was like, I decided I wanted a certain simplicity in the situation. But other than that, and then I edited the whole film with this kind of, like messed up audio. And then we went to the dubbing studio. I went to the dubbing studio with the actors, and they redid their parts based upon what we had recorded, not based on a script. I didn't transcribe, intentionally, I didn't transcribe. I could have transcribed, given them the script, and then they would do their dubbing from the script. I wanted them to hear what they had said in the actual city, what they performed, and to re-perform it. And that's what happened in the dubbing. They were basically re-performing what they had done a few weeks before. And I think what that does is, this piece actually was born 4 years ago, and it started with an image in which I wanted to look at where I live and see it completely silently, and the only moment we hear sound is when people speak. This was my starting point 4 years ago, and I knew that this would be a film called Blind Ambition. That's what I wanted 4 years ago. And so this is where it started. So it's absolutely central. That's absolutely central.
Right.
And when we came to produce it and produce in that way, this moment in the dubbing studio where the actors are reenacting what they've done is also a moment where I'm still the actors are so important for me in a way. I'm still going through their filter, because maybe the difference between working this way and like writing a script or writing a novel or whatever, maybe one difference is that in this case it's possible to work with real human beings, and they're not just for me in this case, they're not just things to tell orders to. They carry themselves as individuals, they carry a history. They carry, and I said this in several situations, and it sounds maybe bombastic, but I mean it. I think each and every single one of them carries the whole history of humanity within them somehow, like all of us in some ways or another. And I want to tap into that, and I want to kind of use that as part of the material and medium of the work. And so, again, part of it in the studio with the dubbing, by having them reenact this is like, it's almost like another layer where this is kind of
because it kind of depletes interaction. I mean, like Doom Talk, where you sort of isolated the instruments from the rest of the ensemble without the musician having headphones and listening to what the rest of the ensemble is doing. Does that isolation again create a condition?
Yes, it creates a condition, and it also allows for what I'm saying. It also allows for this, maybe we're saying this history of human, the totality of human experience, whatever. But it also allows for this automated thing to come through, which is if you want to look at it from Marxist critique, this is supposed to be ideology, and we're supposed to be absolutely critical of it. But actually, this is also the condition in which we actually are what we are. And I'm interested in that. I'm interested in that moment, and I try to look for it in many, many different ways. I have no one way of looking for it. I think every single work exerts its own, creates its own condition and therefore its own rules.
Again, if we can see every sort of, in this case, I don't want to call them scenes per se, but let's see, situations. If we see each situation as a kind of suspension, I mean, that breaks that normal narrative curve of, beginning, tension, the climax, resolution, in Hollywood films or soap operas or whatever. Of course, this time seems non-linear, and this time seems again in a suspension. I mean, does this time pretend to exist in a pre-climax? Pre-climax. I mean, the point where we're in narrative, in classical narrative, where there is a kind of
we're about to have resolution.
Yeah, I mean, like the big guy could have slapped the kid who owes him money, whatever. Right, I mean, that doesn't happen. And these two girls could have had a fight. There was this brink.
Yes. Yes. But I mean, maybe that's actually drama, Yeah. That's actually, maybe the lack of resolution is also, sure. I would say, is also a trick, because resolutions do happen also. People do slap each other and right. do have fights and etc. But maybe, I mean, for my purposes, I was this moment of suspension, I think is, and it's in other works as well, is actually important, because I think it allows, I hope it allows us as audience, of a work to engage with this work, not just through interpretation, but rather through encounter. So if we're looking at something and it's kind of suspended and it's unresolved, and then we have to deal with it. That's what I'm trying to say. We have to engage with it in a way. We can't just say it's done. It's reached its. Again, this is not a rule. I mean, just speaking about this work, because resolution can work in other ways. But I think I'm not sure. Also, because I don't plan things with purpose. I know kind of what I want to do, and I discover it as I go along. And I think that this is possibly part of why I'm interested in suspension here. In Muslim Gauze, which is in the exhibition, there is also this condition of suspension, but I think it has a different role. I think there it's about creating a situation where the audience can project upon the figure of the boy, and therefore kind of re-engage with history, because it's set in a certain time and date, as a living thing rather than a distant thing. But maybe here it's about engagement in another way. What do you think? Should we go on, or should we, November? You tell us in terms of time. When should we switch to the audience? Okay.
There's, I mean, a last important point. I mean, in your work in general, titles are important. They were always. I mean, and in some cases, the title came before the form or the idea or the content even.
Yes.
Can you sort of tell us how important are titles to you?
Yeah.
I mean, Blind Ambition. It's quite it's an iconic
big title, and it's presented really big.
Yeah.
I mean, I have 3 works called Blind Ambition. And I have 3 works called I'm Not What I Am.
Right. And they come in different forms.
They come in different forms.
A lecture
they come in different forms. It's very confusing for sometimes it's confusing. But actually, there's several works with the same title that has happened a lot. So, I mean, I think the title, I like the title to be doing something that is not just an address, that it can either pose as part of the content, or it can like in Muslim goes R.I.P., it can problematize the whole film, you know, or I just think titles do have a function, actually, that is beyond just labeling and categorizing. And blind ambition, I find this, you know, these two words very strong. And
I kind of remember, I mean, blind ambition actually was something else one day.
Yes.
I mean, it was, I can't totally remember, but your description of it was maybe a camera moving and a baby and somebody singing. I mean, I don't really remember. It's totally different than this one.
I don't know what that is. But
I mean, you told
something
me
I told you about. Yeah, I don't remember what that is.
I mean, but it's interesting how the
I think don't know what it is. What I think I know, we spoke about something like this, but this was years ago. This could have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, 2005 or something.
Yeah.
Okay, shall we open the floor to questions?
So in the installation in Kassel, apart from the video, there was the glass sculpture with a knot. And how do you feel about the distance of these two in the space in Kassel? Because it was like the one wall was on two walls, and then how do you feel about the distance of these two pieces now? The absence of the sculpture.
Okay. Well, the sculpture, they're two separate pieces, and in Kassel, I wanted to, in a very simple way, it's basically an exhibition. This is kind of my space. I treated it, I was interested in it as an exhibition rather than an installation, and therefore it was an exhibition with only two pieces, basically. And yes, I think that the two pieces communicated to each other in a certain manner, although they're very different in form and direction, etc. But in the end, for me, Blind Ambition is a film on its own, and The Knot is a sculpture on its own, ultimately. And it could be, I mean, this was the first time I actually screened it as a film, and something I desired. But I think they can live separately.
It was really good to see it as a film, because I think it's a totally different piece than seeing it on a TV. And I guess I wanted to play the devil's advocate and ask you about anthropology and how that relates to this film, and in the sense of isolating speech in relation to figures and thinking about characters in terms of class, and I mean, I guess, are you being anthropological when you make this film? And if not, you know, why are you not? And how does form play a role in that? And you know, is it possible that you're potentially recuperating an anthropological position as a kind of formalist position, or not? So.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the good question. Well, if I was being anthropological, then I'm going to be very unhappy with myself. I hope not. I think that there are certain, I mean, one, forgetting even the form, one is the process of production. I think that the fact that this is, and it's a process that is not communicated to the audience, you know, but that this process involves working with the people you actually see, or actors, and working with them in a way that, you know, and that's very important for me actually, in a way that they can tell me this is the best experience I've ever had in my life in acting, you know. I think that makes a big difference in this perspective, because the subjects in that case are not exactly subjects, they're also actually people who are investing something into the work and producing it. That's one thing. I think the second thing is that also again the process, which is when I say observations and things I've heard and things. I mean, I take an active role. I'm not claiming any kind of objectivity in this at all. I'm they're all scenes, situations, etc. that I'm scripting and framing and positioning and very clearly kind of authoring. I mean, there is authorship that I do not shy away from, and I think that also makes it quite different to the claims of anthropology, in which certain objectivity as such, in quotation marks, is taken as one of its basic tenets. I don't know. Do you have a comment?
I mean, it's again, go back to the word condition. I mean, as I said before, it's sometimes it could seem as an illustration or a description of a social condition or of interactive psychology or class or whatever. But as it goes on, I mean, time in each segment, time does play a huge role, and where time is stretched, because you're not just saying, okay, this is how they are, and that's it. There is a stretch, and it has no end.
Yeah, I think just to add to it is that when you said condition, actually, I guess that's where form plays a role. The way it is shot and edited and constructed produces a condition that is far from the comforts of the anthropological. I think. It's almost like dizzying somehow. For me, I felt it was almost dizzying, and I think that's not. I don't think anthropology in its form strives for that. It can witness moments of dizziness in the cultures it's looking at, but it always does that from the position of being sober itself. While this is in a way not sober, because again, the way I decided I used the cell phone, which is light and mobile, etc. But I also decided when I was shooting this that I was going to recuperate something I was doing in the 90s, in which I was using the camera as an extension of my body, and any situation I was shooting, conversations, etc., the rhythms of the way my body moves would have a relationship to how people were talking, etc. And this was something I did in the 90s in some short videos, and then things as normal change, and I used other styles. And here it was I had the desire to come back to that approach, and I think that also is a bit distant to the anthropological.
Just to follow up on that, the business of crediting the Samsung S2 so explicitly.
Yes.
I'm interested in this. It's interesting. Firstly, it's already the technology you've used is already a piece of history. We now have the S3, and if Apple had their way, it'll not be allowed to be imported into America anytime soon. But I was thinking, there were moments where I was watching the film. Of course, the handheldedness, the black and whiteness. I think of Abu Dassouf, right? I think of the kind of liberation of the point of view through, I think it was the Bolex camera. But I was I was trying to imagine, Godard didn't say, shot on a Bolex, and nor did David, does David Fincher say shot on a red cam right at the beginning. It'll be there somewhere in the end credits, but this business of the camera that you used, it's actually part of the title, it seems to me. How are we to read that? Because surely it's got to be more than just handheldness, because obviously handheldedness has been around, as I say, for at least 60 years or something like that.
From the beginning, handhelds from the
Yeah.
very beginning.
So what? Presumably you weren't. You know, it's not a sponsorship nod.
Unfortunately, I
Okay.
didn't think of that.
So what does it mean for to give such prominence to that piece of technology that you use to not only shoot it on, because shooting is obviously one part of the process, but then there's the nature of the file, the technology that you can then edit on, etc., etc. So I mean, are all of those things things that we're meant to somehow, I don't know, innately think of as a kind of prism through which to see the film, or would the film still be the film without that kind of tagline given so prominently?
Yes. Well, I thought about it a lot, actually, because my desire was to immediately kind of make this absolutely clear. And then I was thinking about it and kind of having a moment of, doubt about this and struggling. I mean, it's a film, why do I need to highlight? So I went through a certain process myself about this question. And I think that it's not about handheldness. It's actually, and I'm not in general, I'm not a fan of, saying that medium specificity works in just purely technological forms. But I felt that for this work specifically, using a cell phone was not just about how it's filmed. It was also about the kind of relations it produced in the moment it was filmed. So, for example, like in the mall, the scene in the mall where these two guys are talking. So this is a shot that is a continuous shot from the beginning to the end without a single cut, where you walk through the food court and have a situation and go out. And if this was shot on film, or by video even, it would be virtuosic to the nth degree. But it's shot on a cell phone, and it was difficult, there was some skill in doing it, and people, walkie-talkies and stuff, we coordinated it and nobody noticed. That was part of how we did it. But it's not the same meaning. It's not the same meaning to shoot a scene like that, to enter the public realm and to create little stories within them, but to leave everything unchanged is not the same using this technology. That was my feeling. Because of the relationship, first, to what cell phones are, that I have and that everybody around me has, and also because of the relationship that actors themselves had to the cell phone. So in the beginning, when I first worked with these actors, I didn't tell them I'm shooting this on a cell phone, because I was worried that they might, find it trivial, or what is this bullshit, blah, blah, blah. After I had really got them engaged, involved, and excited, I was like, yeah, we're doing it on the cell phone, this is the newest thing, it's super cool. And everybody was like happy about it. And that had to do also with, I wanted that their relationship to that camera is very different to if it was a camera. So all these things played into somehow the reason why I chose it, but also it felt with time that it became, that this information, I also rarely give information to the audience about how things are done, but that this piece of information was critical to this work. Like if I say, for example, the knot is a sculpture made out of glass, that's a critical piece of information about this work. That if you thought it was made out of salt, or made out of paper, or made out of marble, it would be totally different. The same thing about this film, I felt that the fact that it was shot on a cell phone was critical, was a critical piece of information that, yes, altered kind of what it is to an extent.
Could I add something to that? I totally hear you saying that, yeah, it does alter the actor's relationship to the camera, but I think I'm along the same lines with you here, that wouldn't it suffice to say this film was shot with a cell phone? Because the Samsung is misleading, as if it is indeed produced by Samsung. tissue.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, somehow, maybe this is just a habit, but if somehow if I'm going to give the information, I feel the necessity to give the total information. You know, if I'm going to say that it's shot on this medium, then I would really give detailed information. It's just, so if I had decided, if it was shot on film and I decided it's important to say that it's shot on a, you know, like cinema film, I would then say it's a Kodak or whatever it is, the film stock we used, etc. I would think that's important. If it's important to point out to the medium, then I would rather go all the way. But also because the Samsung, I'm promoting them now, the Samsung S2 cell phone, actually I was kind of stunned by its results when I you know, so it's not another cell phone that might not have the same results. I did tests actually with lots of cell phones, and including the iPhone, and it was better. Whatever, better for my purposes. So I just felt it's important, you know. It's not a. If it was another cell phone, it would really make a difference. Actually, I think actually in this case. So.
Did you show the film to the people who are acting in the film?
Not yet, because I haven't yet screened it in Cairo, so it hasn't yet been shown there, and therefore no one who worked on this film, crew and actors, have seen it yet, but they will when I screen it. I'm just waiting for exactly the right context. I don't want to just screen it, so it's just a matter of the right context, and then I'm going to invite everyone who worked on it, and we'll all see it together. And I don't know what they'll think, but in the dubbing they were happy. So during the shooting they were super happy, and then I was thinking they might be disappointed because it's not, you know, it's not very mainstream. But in the dubbing, where they saw, each one saw their own scene, they were all very excited about that. So I'll do a screening and then we'll see what they'll think.
And what are your future plans? Will you kind of, for example, reflect the actual situation in Cairo, or?
No, I don't know what you mean, sorry.
What are your next plans doing in this region?
What am I going to do next in my own work in general? I'm working on a piece of music, so I'm going back home tomorrow, and I'm finishing up a piece of music in the next 10 days. That's the next thing I'm doing.
Can I kind of, sorry, answer your question with a question, or ask you a question? Why did you ask this question about if the actors saw it or not? Because I just feel that when people ask this question to work like this, that does involve the actor's own personality and their own, not just that, and putting people in a kind of lab or an experiment. Is your question to do with ethics?
No, it doesn't. I just wanted to hear how they interpret the situation, because he had his own ideas in which he wants to show us something, and whether they see it in this way or in different ways, because they are trapped in their situations, in their own histories, as you taught. So that was kind of like, I was just curious.
Yeah, because often with this kind of work, I know what you mean, because often with this kind of work, performers cannot see what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, I mean, it's important to say they are actors, and this is not them. This is actors. This is also very important. So they're not in a lab. It's just a certain way of working that they told me a lot of them was very, very fulfilling for them also as actors. So it's not a social experiment. it's a film with actors and it's acting, and it's not who they are. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Thank you.